Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Florida Rugby Union's Town Hall on return to play after the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Ross Davenport. We'll be joined here in a minute by some members of the FRU Executive Board who will be going through a quick slideshow. And we'll obviously take any questions that anyone may have regarding FRU's return to play protocol. So feel free, if you're on YouTube or on Facebook, to drop some questions in the comments, and we'll get to those as soon as is appropriate to during the presentation. So let's bring in our executive board at this time. And we have Evan Haig, GM of the Florida Rugby Union. We have Kerry O'Malley, current president of the Florida Rugby Union. We have Ian Henry, senior men's VP. I think we may have some other ones joining us too. I know Jessie Promet, who's the collegiate VP for both the men and women. She's on audio-wise, and maybe we'll see some other guests later on in the show. There's Rick Comiskey, secretary of the Florida Rugby Union. So we've got everybody that can answer any of your questions. So again, if you have any questions about this, please drop them in the comments on YouTube or Facebook. Evan, let's get to our little slideshow. Well, talk a bit about how you've come up with this protocol of return to play for the Florida Rugby Union.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've basically been fielding a lot of questions around how people can return to play, how they can get to practice, how the timelines are all going to work, and what's allowable and what's not. So we've worked really hard as the board, and Kerry's really been driving this from the president's standpoint to make sure that we have ourselves covered and teams know exactly how to return and how to do that. So we've created our webpage on our site to give everybody the guidelines, and then now we're kind of getting to the point where we have to start thinking about how we return to play, actually playing games and match play. Not that we're there yet because social distancing is still in order. But when that drops, we want to have that process in place, and so everybody has an idea of how to deal with it all. I suppose Kerry's probably got a couple more things to add in because she's been the real driver behind how to do this. Her and Mary have been great. And I'll kind of turn it over to her for a quick moment to say a couple of words, and then I have some kind of slideshows to go through for everybody to work it out.
Thanks, Evan. So the majority of what we're going to cover today really revolves around the USA Rugby Guidelines. And what we've done is, since those are extensive, is to just try to provide something that is a little bit more palatable in terms of players and coaches and things understanding that document and how it reflects to us locally, because we obviously have some differences throughout the state as to what teams can and cannot do. And I think that we're anticipating that will stay the same in terms of there being variability throughout the state over the next couple of months. But since we've been getting a lot of the same questions from people, we wanted to provide them this opportunity to also ask us questions about the document. We had Evan basically draft it, and then we reviewed it as a board. But I would say from a scientific standpoint, myself and Mary both work in the medical field. So I think that we've been fairly stringent with some of the things that we want to see done. So
for sure, obviously, we have obviously a different situation down here, in the South Florida area, in the Tri-County area, in that we're still in phase one, while a lot of the other counties in the state, I think everybody else may be in phase two by now. So I'm sure that will be addressed as well. Charlie, you want to run the slideshow here? We can get going with this, and Evan and Kerry can take us through it. And if Rick and Ian, Jesse have any input as well, you're obviously welcome. All right, so yeah, I'll go through this first slide, which is basically just a summary of what will be discussed in this slideshow. So obviously the big question, go back to that, Charlie. You're getting a little anxious with that button.
I'm a clicker. I understand.
So first question, obviously, which one the main question everybody wants answers to is when we will be able to return to playing rugby. Obviously, there's probably a big difference between playing friendlies and playing league matches and when they can happen and versus practices, and we'll get into all of that. How do we practice and still abide by the social distancing requirements? Ideas for player development and coach development during this time. And then when play returns, how will the season work for each of the individual divisions? So I'll let Evan, I'll let you drive this, and then we'll obviously, if we have any questions, I'll jump in.
Awesome. Thanks, Ross. So the first one is, how will we be returning to play? So kind of how does that actually work? So what we need to remember is right now we can't physically tackle or touch or get within social 6 feet distancing. So we have to make sure that we get that within that, stay within those guidelines so we can return to practice, but mainly that's really associated around kind of keeping your social distancing. We'll talk a little bit about, there's a good question later on about whether we can use balls or not, but we have to keep our social distancing. That means there's no touch, there's no tackling. So that has to be able to be dropped so then we can actually get into physical contact and be able to deal with contact practices. And then a club needs to then have to apply to a return to training. So we have that process on our website. And that kind of return to training just kind of asks you to go through some parameters and understand what's required. You have to have done the COVID World Rugby thing, testing and the course, and then you have to have kind of got permission from your county or your city, depending on whoever you rent your field from, to say that you're allowed to return to practice and to do that. So once you kind of got those two things, then you can kind of return to practicing. So you have to have gone through that. And then the last piece is we have to have gatherings of up to 250 people. And that number is driven from World Rugby. That's their guideline as to when they would like us to return to playing. So both social distancing dropped and the 250 people allowance of gatherings of that many people. So as you can tell, and what Ross was saying there before, is South Florida is a long way behind where, the northern parts of the state are. And what we will see over the coming months will be some counties and cities allowing certain things and other ones not. And we're just going to have to be dynamic in the way that we deal with that. And we just really encourage all the clubs to communicate directly with us to help you through that process and to deal with that. We need to be able to go through kind of all of those before we can really start thinking about how we're going to sanction. So just kind of, it's a really important thing. And I think the biggest one that everybody needs to put their head around when it comes to rugby is we are still required to keep social distancing. And that's a really important facet for what we can do. So that's the kind of the long and short of it. Charlie, if you want to jump onto the next one. So what we said in that, go for it, Carrie.
Can I hop in 1 second?
Yep.
We have a question from John Davenport. So I wanted to answer. I know that we'll probably answer it in the course of the things, but I would not want to keep John waiting. So John, I wanted to tell you the question about liability insurance. So when we're able to, and USA Rugby has opened up registration, and we can have Evan talk about the registration kind of towards the end as like one of the details, but clubs are going to be able to register their players. It's going to be the same type of guideline that it was before. So when you have 15 registered, then USA Rugby will be able to provide you with an insurance certificate. And so I know that it'll be a little bit more challenging convincing players to register when they cannot actually play a match yet. But if they are going to be training, then they're supposed to have that insurance. And we'll get into more details, but that's pretty much the short answer. And then hopefully we can kind of cover more of that as we go on.
Yeah, and Kerry, to that, I'll kind of walk through everybody at the end there. If Charlie, you just take a note for me to go over the new registration process, and I can kind of explain how that goes at the end.
That's great.
Perfect. Then the next kind of piece that, as the board, we discussed was how are we going to do it? So we need to set some dates, and some of the things Kerry brought back to us was she's on the new GU council, and some of the best practices that they've done, particularly in the Northeast, right, Kerry, where they just set a date and said there'll be no league play on this date. So then that gives everybody a hard line of when this is. So what we decided is that there'll be no league play before December 5th. So that doesn't mean that if one county or two counties come out early that you can't go and play friendly matches. But what we're saying is we're not planning on any league play happening before December 5th. So that includes the College Sevens tournaments. That includes any other league things that we sometimes do in the fall. Sometimes men's Premier Division plays some fall games. We know that that's not going to happen before December 5th. And then sometimes we run the NSCRO men's college stuff in the fall too. We know that won't happen before December 5th. So what we're saying is just putting a hard line for everybody in the sand. There'll be no sanctioned league play within that. And then what we also wanted to do is kind of give everybody some understanding of what we would like to see in terms of this guidelines from when we do go back to playing contact. So we don't expect and we don't want clubs to, all right, on Monday, your county got cleared to do contact practice. That doesn't mean come Saturday you can go and play a friendly match. We really want you to get 3 weeks of heavy contact practice to build them out, because players will have been out of contact, out of this, what we assume will probably be close to 9 months' time. So that's really important for us to kind of like have teams understand that we really want to give you a 3-week period before you return to match play and playing friendly matches. Obviously work with us on that and dealing with that. But, we gave a really good example here. If you contact starts October 3rd, then you shouldn't schedule a match before October 24th. It's kind of just giving you that 3 weeks, so 6 practices total to really wind yourself up into that. And that was a key detail we really wanted from the board to see that within that. And obviously all of this, you need to work with us to let us know that, hey, listen, our county's coming, said they're allowing us to do contact as of this date. And then we can kind of work with you the rolling components of how to deal with that. So Kerry, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
No.
Okay, perfect. Charlie, you want to jump on to the next one? So kind of just adds more to this is what we're calling a rolling build out. So we were going to use Florida as a whole, but Rick actually made this really good point, was that really is pertinent to each division. So if each team within that division has hit allowed to return to contact, and once that last team within that division do, we're going to give 3 weeks before we ask them to play friendly matches, and then we're not going to schedule league play for another 6 weeks from the first date within that. That could change come December, depending upon a board review of like, all right, looks like we're going to be ready to go in January. Maybe we might want to reduce that to a month of a rollout and build out, but we're just trying to give everybody a nice long runway to prepare yourselves for a season that's probably going to be pretty intense and short, with not a lot of breaks in the season. If we get into January, February, March before we're able to play, it's really going to be a jam-packed season within that. So trying to ensure that you have enough time to develop your players and get them ready to return to playing match play, but also not delay the season too much within that. So that's the balancing act that we're going to have to deal with this. But for the most part, what we'd like to see is a 3-week before contact practice, have 3-week roll in before you can go in and kind of take on gameplay within that. And as we said, everything can be reviewed and talked with us. So within this, let's just, these are guidelines for us to follow, and we really want to make sure that we're doing the best for everybody. And if we miss something there and we feel like we need to adjust, then we're going to adjust and communicate really directly with each division of how they want to play. Kerry, did you have anything else you wanted to add in?
No, just to let people know again that would be reviewed later. We want to try to give people something that they can plan for now. Okay,
perfect. So the next one is, how do we practice but still abide by social distancing requirements? So these are the kind of the steps that we were just talking about before, and we can kind of bang through this pretty quickly, because what we really want to get to is, how do you actually think about practicing and doing that? But you need to make sure you complete the World Rugby COVID course. You need to be in contact with your local county or city parks, and they'll give you their rules and regulations for what they require from you. We need that permission forwarded to the FRU, and you just can communicate with me about how to do that. We need to complete the FRU authorization letter that just basically outlines you understand the different parameters that we're expecting from you on that. And then you need to kind of design practices that work on skills and fitness that keep you 6 feet apart. So that's the way you got to think about things and kind of thinking through all of that. So this jump on, Kerry, unless you had anything else to add, now I was just going to jump on and kind of, I think the next one is where we talk about the ways that people can do this.
I have one thing. So I see that Steve asked us a question about the return to rugby guideline. So we can kind of answer that now as it comes in, and then we'll talk about it. So the USA Rugby protocol has basically, they call it 4 phases. Those 4 phases do not, even though there's a 1 through 4, they do not correspond identically, I think, with what the CDC or state guidelines would be. So they have like a 4 steps. And so, I think even in step 3, we'll open it, or phase 3. I think that they have a guideline in terms of if you're allowed to have shared equipment, if you're allowed to have shared balls or not, if your coaches are allowed to be present. So that's really all outlined in the USA Rugby document. So we don't necessarily we're not going to try to interpret that. We've actually already been, I don't want to say like reprimanded, but when we put together an infographic to try to explain where we were now, people were a little hesitant in saying that we shouldn't provide any interpretation for people because there could be legal ramifications. But I know that, when I was coaching, that the majority of my players would not read that document. So we were trying to simplify it. So that is available. It is on our site. And when Evan goes through some of these return to play things, I'll talk about an area where I would say I've provided a little bit of interpretation from that phase 3 versus phase 4. So I'll put it back to Evan, and then that way, if there's follow-up questions on these, we can get to them when we get towards the end.
Yeah. So what we've wanted to do, and we'll probably share these throughout, is give everybody some ways to find different ways to still practice but abide by the social distancing return to play. So Kerry forwarded on a really nice Rugby Coach Weekly have done a free component to where you can kind of see some of the drills that they have come up with and some ideas on how to return to play. So that's a really nice little site where you can go in and pick up some drills and some ways that you can kind of stay within those guidelines, but still use some of those. The other one has Flow Rugby did it's a bit of a lengthy, wordy article for my liking, but it still gives you some baseline kind of ideas of where you could translate some things going, all right, okay, I can see how I could do that. Or these are ways I could do that, like individual kicking and just different things that Flow Rugby has put on there, just some of their ideas in an article they created. There was a couple, one of them is on the Facebook one there, which has one of the teams in the Northeast, and they were doing pool noodle touch rugby. So basically they had a 6-foot pool noodle and they were able to touch you on defense. You have the pool noodle touch that keeps you this 6-foot distance, but then the passing, they're able to pass and share. And Kara can kind of go over the little interpretation there within that with the ball. Because I think there's a good question at the end. Maybe Kerry will just kind of have the answer to that for Ken from UF. But it kind of still keeping your social distancing, but using a pool noodle, just different ways that you could do to keep your distance, but still kind of have some form of rugby activity going that's more relevant to rugby than just individual components. It is going to be a challenge. We don't expect it to be easy. Another one is a YouTube clip from the UK. They have, and as Steve kind of mentioned there, they have slightly different parameters and they're in a different timeline of where we're at. But it's you have some really interesting ideas of how they did it. So they had the big tackle dummies and the players are doing 3 or 4 hits on the tackle dummies. They got up and then they wiped down the tackle dummies. And there was no one else holding the hit shield, but there was the round tackle dummy, and they wiped those all down. When they were done, then they could hand that over to the next person. So that still kept the social distancing, but it just kind of gave you an idea of how to keep everything clean and coordinated on that, but still be able to get some form of rugby related things in there. So you just have to think outside the box a little bit. And we want to kind of share on some of those links to deal with that. So we'll make sure that those are on the on our Return Townhall website, which has a whole bunch of information on there. And we can kind of go from there. Kerry, did you have anything else kind of practice-wise you wanted them to deal with, or?
Yeah, so I may be getting ahead of myself here in terms of this. So just to be really straightforward in terms of contact training, we've had a lot of people ask us about contact training. And my question is, why I want to hit people, right? Like, so I understand, like my guys want to hit someone, everybody wants to hit someone right now, like everyone's feeling it, but you really don't need contact training until you're able to do a contact match, is the way we're trying to interpret it. That's my perspective. So I know your guys want to hit a bag, but if one person's hitting a bag and another person comes and hits that bag, that's less than 6 feet. Same for touch rugby. We've been asked about that. Now I know I'm going to say that there may be some touch leagues throughout the state that may be be doing things. But in terms of return to play, touch rugby right now would not be allowed, because if you're supposed to stay 6 feet from someone, in order to touch them, you have to get within 6 feet, unless there's someone with really long arms that I don't know about. But so the noodle is like the pool noodle thing. I know it seems ridiculous, right? But it would be better to get your players out on a field and do something ridiculous than doing nothing at all, or potentially not following the guidelines. So the guidelines are there because they're trying to keep people safe. But the other reason from our standpoint is your liability insurance, which John asked about earlier. So you obtain a liability insurance because you are following these return to play guidelines. If you have a player that would potentially get injured doing something at training, then they would not be provided insurance coverage. It would also nullify your group's coverage. So if you are, let's say that there's a contract between you and a Rex and Parks, and Rex and Parks says, you have this certificate because you've been allowed to, you've been authorized by USA Rugby. USA Rugby's provided you that authorization under the guidelines that you're not going to be going ahead of where you're supposed to be in terms of where your local health department is. So one of the reasons we've provided the links, because it seems to me when people are asking to do things, it's because they don't know what to do. And so they're like, these are the things I normally do for rugby training, and I'm not allowed to do any of them. And so then they interpreted that as they can't do any rugby. And so what we're trying to get people to do is we're trying to teach old dogs new tricks, and you're going to have to go and figure some stuff out. Is it, going to be perfect? No, but will you maintain something for your players to do? And I can see it being a huge positive, again, because we're limited in what we can do, but a bunch of people outside staying 6 feet apart, I think would be really good for everybody's mental health. I can jump to Ronnie's question right now in terms of if another geographical area has been asked, or Evan, should we address that in one of the future ones?
No, I think you should address it now because I don't have it in any of those. I think it's a great.
Sure. Yep. Okay. So I'll do it. So we had the same question. So we've already had a club from Georgia contact us because certain areas of Georgia have been allowed to return to play. And so now they're interested in coming here. And so we've told them not until obviously, a club is able to follow those guidelines. So if Ronnie, if you're coaching a club and your group hasn't been able to do 3 weeks of contact training, we wouldn't want your players to then go and play a match in another area. So if your area still has not been able to do training, then we wouldn't want those people to then go travel to an area that was able to do training. I'd say that perspective would be one from a safety perspective, a physical safety perspective, because I can tell you if someone said, hey, Gainesville's cleared to play, the guys would want to be out there tackling each other like the next day. So we're trying to put this into place so that people will build their way up in terms of getting their bodies ready. And then also, if a certain area has not been authorized to do training, then we think that area might be considered a higher risk. And this is why for like Georgia, it's different because that's like crossing state lines and things. But, if a club from Georgia wants to come here and play, we really want to make sure that they're not in a higher risk area, because the guidelines for Georgia might be a little bit different than the guidelines for Florida. I don't know if that answered your question exactly, Ronnie. And I know that it might be a situation, particularly for the clubs in South Florida, where that 3 and 6 week guideline, since we're so far away from being able to do that, where we might kind of change that. So if it comes, say, December 5th, and we're looking at like the beginning of January, then it might be like, okay, maybe that 6 weeks isn't really realistic, and let's allow people to go and play.
Yep. Excellent. Charlie, you want to
Evan,
jump
should
in?
we talk about the balls, or are we getting to that?
Yeah, we'll get to the balls because we have a question pertinent to that. I think we're almost done here.
Sure.
So there's only a couple more slides left. So basically what we want to get at is kind of give everybody a quick concept of what their division may look like returning to play. And things are obviously very much in flux here. So ideally, we're able to return to play in January and all the divisions look the same and we function the same roughly the way it did this year. So we're going to try to keep the divisions the same. There are some scheduling things that we'll have to adjust. Men's Premier needs some adjustment based on to get more teams games, so there's an even amount of games. So we'll have to work through that. And obviously we'll have no fall rugby there, so we'll have to deal with spring. So that's slightly different. The Division 4 men's will need some adjustment, but I do feel like this Premier women will be fine. The college women will all rotate in around about the same. College women D2 has 2 new clubs coming back in, which is great. So there's just some slight adjustments, but we kind of want everybody to know somewhat of ideally a status quo of continuing on with where we're at. But ultimately, we can't make any of these final decisions or do any deep planning or present anything until we have a better understanding of when we know kind of a rough idea of when we're going to be able to return to play and the restrictions are lifted. So once we get to that point, then we can really have some detailed discussions with each individual divisions. This won't be, hey, listen, this is what's going to be. We'll see you in 4 weeks. Good luck. And there'll be no communication. All the vice presidents and myself will work directly with the divisions, and we'll come up with what the best plan is at that stage for that division. There could be any number of things that we'll have to do with. We may have to not start until March, and then that might mean we have to totally change where it works. Nationals might not happen, or it may happen. We just don't know how it's all looking. So right now we're planning like it's going to continue on as normal come January. And for teams to think like that, but that is going to get adjusted and reviewed, and we should have a much clearer idea of what that looks like come November, December time period. Charlie, you want to jump on to the next one? Okay, so here are the open questions. So Kerry, this is what you want to kind of go over with the balls. So the question is from Ken at UF. So Ross, you want to read that out for us since you're a better reader than I am?
So from UF men's rugby, we're required to submit a return to play plan as a sports club to the university. If they approve the use of communal equipment with the proper safety precautions, i.e. passing and catching balls, what issues will we have with FRU and USA Rugby if we do use balls for practice?
So there's 2 components of this. The first one is that the liability insurance and other things that kind of go when players register, when they say they're not taking any responsibility if someone contracts coronavirus while playing rugby. So I think that from I'll say CYA, I can't think of a better way to put it, perspective from USA Rugby, their use of shared equipment in terms of balls seems very conservative to me. And so we're asking people to submit the use of balls when they do their return to play documents. So Jacksonville actually called us out on this. So I'm going to thank Jacksonville for really putting us under the gun in terms of, when you look at the guideline, the use of balls seems really far down the line. And so some of the comments that Steve's had here, and the things in terms of disinfecting balls and things, coronavirus isn't primarily spread through airborne, and so the likelihood of if players wash their hands and a ball is disinfected in the beginning of training, the likelihood of a ball being a source of contagion is, in my opinion, almost non-existent. I'm not going to say it doesn't exist because there are still things we don't know. And so I would say ask to use the balls, and it's highly likely that will get approved. And so I would say that from a liability perspective, the likelihood of someone being injured by a ball is, again, really low. Someone gets injured by a ball, maybe they should be asking themselves if they should even be out on the pitch. So, but I would say that, I think that maybe the use of balls is probably seen as people are kind of ramping up where they're going. So Ken, I think you'd probably be all right. From knowing UF and knowing the colleges are going to be more conservative, I think, than almost anyone. And so just put it in your return to play application is what we've told to people. And I think the sharing of that type of equipment is fine. Now, it might be a little bit different once we get up to the use of something like hand shields. So.
Thanks, Carrie. Before I get to the Fort Miami women question, just because it's non-COVID related, let's clear up the questions that we have on the. So Jack asked if this will be on the website. I know Charlie this will be obviously be reposted on Facebook, and the slideshow as well. I'm sure will be posted on the FRU site, so it should be everywhere you need to find it, Jack. So anybody that missed this live can obviously go back and watch it. We also have another question from Ronnie. How do the return to play guidelines work for teams like the Stormers, where we're more of an invitational travel side that practices twice a month? If a Florida area like Tampa is clear, but South Florida is still in restriction, can we schedule our practices up there and still get the clearance to play? And do our practices need to be 3-week consistent contact sessions? Who wants to take that, Jem?
Carrie, I think.
I'll take it. So Ronnie, I have no idea. And so I would say that's something that we'd have to consider in terms of doing, we would ask you to do an application, so I can't say yes or no. I mean, from my perspective, everything that you've outlined there, I know some people, if we think of this as a continuum, and I'm kind of more on the trying to be conservative, but still, even when I take a look at this, I'm thinking that we could probably make that work, but there might be additional guidelines for you in terms of what we'd want to see. So, if your players want to travel, I think that we might, if you have 1 or 2 players traveling up from Miami to an area that is cleared, then we might want to ask you to do some additional steps in terms of getting testing of the players and documentation of that, in terms of making that happen. I think it also has to do with what type of testing is available where you're at, and so I think we should probably work with that on one-on-one. And the reason I say that is if people are like, Tampa can train, then and no one else can, then Crew might have, the only team in the state, because everyone's like, well, we can just go to Crew and play, right? Because they're allowed, and this is being allowed. So that's why I want to say we kind of want to consider that on a case-by-case basis.
I had a couple of questions that came into my head as we were going along here. What do you guys suggest somebody does if they know that people, perhaps a team that they're involved with or another club in the local area is violating the return to play protocol? Obviously, telling their coach might not be the best idea, but is there someone they can email, somewhat anonymously to say, look, this team's not doing what they should be doing?
Yeah, I would say to reach out to me as the president, and then we had discussed having discipline guidelines around this, because I could see that giving a particular team an unfair advantage in terms of, I'm going to say, stealing players. I don't know. There's a better way to put it. Certain areas, there's only one show in town. And so we'd still want to know there's not a ton of, we don't have any guidelines right now in terms of discipline. But I would think that it would put a particular team at an unfair advantage if players could go there and train, and then another team is following the rules and things. Because the issue mostly has to do with the liability. And, there is a certain element of we're all adults. And this is where, to go back to the touch rugby, and I know that some people are probably doing touch rugby with their local touch rugby league. And I can't go out there and tell them that they can't if they're doing that, not under their USA Rugby insurance. However, if a team is, using that certificate to get a field and now also putting their club at an unfair advantage, I think we'd want to know. And then we would have to have a discussion about how that, what that looks like from a discipline standpoint. We have a really robust discipline committee now. We've really lawyered it up. And so we have Neil is our chair, and we have a lot of people on there and we have several referees. So we have players and referees. You know, we have several different perspectives, and then we'd have to kind of consider that. You know, we want people to play, so you know, we're just trying to get people to do it safely and not putting themselves at risk.
Yeah, and Kerry, to add to that too, we've had a couple of clubs we've reached out to directly, either someone's forwarded us social media or someone's sent us those things, and all we've done is just reached out to them, and both clubs that we've spoken to have been very amenable, like, okay, sorry, we messed that up, and we'll get the stuff to return back in. And they kind of understand, you know, within that they're taking that risk on themselves, unless they follow the protocols and unless they get their sanctioning from us. They're not really running underneath our banner. And like I said, Kerry said, most of the time they're adults. They get to make that choice themselves, and ideally they don't ruin things for other clubs. And that's what we're trying to get them to point out within this. So it's going to be challenging, and we're just going to have to work through it all and deal with it.
I see another question in the chat. Ross, would you mind if I answered that one before?
This one from Jack.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'll talk about this from a standpoint of, you know, I started playing rugby a long time ago, and when I played rugby, people used to run around the field naked, and you know, they might still. Okay, but we did it across the street from a bunch of houses. And I would say, you know, they're still part of me when I meet. I'm now like older, and I go to a work function, and I'm the rugby coach. And so now everybody's remembering from 20 years ago when people used to run around naked in open communities. We've had issues with, you know, we had a team shirt that people had to wear, and then you know, there's everybody in the team shirt underage drinking, and so I would say that from our perspective, you know, if we really want to promote rugby, the last thing that we would need is an outbreak associated with one of our trainings and one of our gatherings. And I just really want to communicate that, because we're still dealing with the naked, drunken people reputation. And so I don't want to add the careless coronavirus spreaders to that list. So if a group of people got together without a coach and they did something on their own, not at their field, not in, you know, their gear, you know, I know even at the field here locally, everyone knows who we are. And so if they're out there with a rugby ball, there are some people that know what that is. And so they'll know it's people out there playing rugby. And so if locally that is not what is accepted, I want to, you know, caution people in terms of what they're doing in terms of trying to promote the sport in the long run. So it seems like, you know, I'm not saying that this is what your group is going to do, Jack, but for some people, you know, it feels like a short-term gain and an immediate gratification issue that will potentially be bad for rugby in the long run. So that's, you know, if people are out there and they're doing that, like I said, hopefully they're adults and they made that decision to go do that thing. They're passing a ball and they're only 2 feet apart, or so we can't stop them. But if it's you know, if, oh, let's go out without a coach and then it's not a training, I don't know if that's going to be like a loophole we're going to allow.
Gotcha. Charlie, you want to throw that Fort Miami question back up there again? We'll deal with that. And I think, Evan, maybe you can talk about the AGM coming up and the dates and how that's going to run. We obviously have other questions like this one can be answered. From Fort Miami Women, why was there such a gap in the Premier Men's prize pool, $3,500, and the Premier Women's prize pool, $500 for winning states? I realize there are more men registered, but $3,000 is a big gap for teams that do the same, if not more, traveling during the season and in the postseason. As a union, we want to bridge that gap.
Yep. And Andrea's spot on. So in fact, the prize money is only what we can contribute is $500 per division per winner. So it's an even amount within that. So I clarified this with Andrea where we got this. Basically, so everything is even. So if you won the women's premier, you would win $500 from the union, $500 for winning the men's premier. But what the men's premier decided they wanted to do is they wanted to do a buy-in. So then that money could be pooled and then given to the winners. So it was 9 teams at $500. That's $4,500. the winner got 3,500 and the runner-up got 1,000, and that's how they wanted to kind of split the prize money within that component. So it was kind of a buy-in. We also added a $500 forfeit deposit, all of these things. Those things we actually didn't roll into this season because we kind of got at it late. We wanted to make sure that we kind of got that division back functioning correctly before we really started adding those parameters in. And I would imagine we're probably under review for this year because we don't really know what the season looks like. So that'll be a communication we'll have directly to that. And the senior women can do that. All 5 of those teams could have a buy-in to where that pulls the money, then helps that advancing team within that. It's really on those divisions to kind of come up with those parameters that they all agree to it. Then they do that. Some of the ideas around that was to try to drive a higher level of performance for the Premier Division men to see them want to play a little better. So we obviously didn't roll it out completely this year, but that answers that question within that. And then the other one, Ross, I had was registration, unless there are any other follow-up ones that you might have on that, Ross. Okay.
No, I think I'm good. Yeah, go ahead with the registration.
Perfect. So registration, USA Rugby is moving to a new platform. It's called Sport Lomo. Each club will have a login to that, to where in theory they can charge their club dues on that, and that money goes directly to their bank account. USA Rugby's got this new platform to where we no longer, when we register, that money no longer goes to USA Rugby's bank account, and then 3 months later eventually ends up in our bank account from the FRU standpoint. What now happens is that the union dues go directly to our account, USA Rugby money goes directly to theirs, and if the club had that, they could go to theirs too from there. So when a player registers, it would just look like they're registering for Boca Men, and it's $300 to register for Boca Men, but that also includes their USA Rugby dues, that includes their FRU dues, and then their Boca dues. So that it's a new platform. It's going to take a little bit of onboarding within that. They told us that it was live 2 weeks ago. The system didn't work. Rick and I have been kind of working with them. I still continue to work with Sport Lomo to try to get this going. They're completely overawed and snowed under trying to get this going, because I think they didn't anticipate how complicated USA Rugby's different tiers and levels of play are going to be and the different requirements that it had. So I would encourage, if you're trying to register, to be patient with it. The clubs are in the system, but we're having trouble actually getting it live and active for everybody what they need. But we would need to have it live, and we've told this to Sport Lomo and to USA Rugby, because we'll have teams who need to get their certificate of insurance by September 1st to keep their fields, even though they're not using it. I know there are clubs out there who submit an annual contract, and they have to have that COI to keep that contract and to keep their field going. So what I've been told is that the COIs will be available come September 1st for most clubs to at least hold on to their fields. As Kerry was saying, we think it's going to require you to have 15 players, but we haven't had that confirmed yet. So I'm trying to get all that information. As you can imagine, there's a lot of different details on that to kind of come out. But yeah, everybody's registration right now and certificate of insurance is good until the end of August. So we've got a couple more, another week or so. And then come September 1st, there's a new COI, and I believe it's with a new insurance carrier. So the COI will look different. So we'll have to kind of deal with all of that with USA Rugby on that. But yeah, within that world, we hope everything will be ready by September 1st. We've got our things done in the back end. There's just one extra layer that we can't seem to get right with Sport Lomo. So I'm hoping next week I can get that sorted for everybody. Will you cover, what do you mean by?
Oh, sorry, I had my unmute. I think he meant
that.
I think you just covered registration, but can you talk about continuing education, and perhaps also maybe how the referee certification will be handled now with obviously the uncertainty with USA Rugby?
Kerry, do you have much on that? I haven't been given a lot of details, but the GU group that Kerry's on probably has some good details. And my understanding, it's all underneath USA Rugby's banner. They're trying to do most of it online for this year. But Kerry, you got anything? Did they give you any more details on that?
Yeah. So from a USA Rugby perspective, I'm talking for senior club rugby right now. I can't really talk for a collegiate perspective because now the different divisions are going to have different leadership kind of committees and things. So there is someone in charge of training development that was recently elected. Her name is Katie Worst. And so she is trying to come up with ways in which the coaching education and the referee education are going to look in terms of certification. So those certifications might look a little bit different, particularly now in the face of coronavirus, and in terms of continuing education. From an alternative perspective, I will touch briefly on some of the things that we're doing with Ignite. So there is a coaching platform. And we've been working with Ignite Rugby. We did a small online trial for a few coaches to get some feedback on what they liked and didn't like. And Evan's been working directly with them to come out with I want to say a seminar series so that our coaches are provided the opportunity to do continuing education as a group that is kind of catered towards the types of things that are going on here in Florida. And so there should be more details coming out about that. And I would highly encourage people to take part because I do think, I don't want to speak poorly about USA Rugby, but I would say that in terms of figuring out what's going on is probably going to take more time, particularly because they're going to have less money. And I think that doing the Ignite program would be highly valuable to get our coaches kind of moving forward. We also felt that, I've taken some of the USA Rugby classes, and I'll try not to get too far off topic, and they are really good with working on active questioning and ways to coach, but not necessarily a ton in terms of content. And I know that, people want to know what is the next thing. And, I love Chris Booshausen from Palm Beach. He was at one point just, I'll fly back to South Africa. Not all of us can fly there. And so what we want to do is provide opportunities for coaches to continue to develop on what is mainstream. I see another question regarding our budget. And so right now we're in the process of working with our new treasurer in terms of coming up with where we stand financially. So I would say that, some of the expenses we didn't incur in terms of, say, the state championship. So the state championship, I don't have it in front of me, but I would say the state championship, the cost for us would say be around $3,000. And so that's an expense that we didn't incur. I don't know if there aren't a lot of similar expenses. So, states and tournaments, those are the main ones that I can think of. There's also some lost revenue. So we stopped people from March onward from registering. And so I think that some of it might balance out. So if we think of our membership in terms of about 1,500 members, I know we're slightly higher. And if we take states, which is about 3,000, it wouldn't be a significant amount. And then we sometimes have players that either register right before the deadline, which was April 1st. And so that's the final deadline for USA Rugby registration. And for some of the people on here, they're like, why wouldn't you register till April 1st? Well, if you're a club that's looking at postseason play and you got a couple old dudes around that you're like, hey, we might need a deeper bench. There might be some players that you might be able to, I don't want to say dig up, or you have that person that's like, they're a prima donna and they didn't want to play. And so now you're like, hey guys, we're going to be moving on. Can you come out? And then sevens, we wouldn't have had, there was probably sevens expenses in there. But then we would also not have, we do have some players that are sevens only. It's usually a reduced registration fee. I want to say it's usually about $15 instead of the 30. So we'll be working with Keel to take a look at the budget. He's recently been added to our bank accounts, and we'll be taking a look at, usually before the AGM, we kind of review what our spending's been for the year. I would say if there were excessive funds, if that doesn't balance out, I would consider returning money to clubs But just off the top of my head, it might be about $2 or $3 per player.
Gotcha. Evan, you want to talk about the AGM coming up and how that will work for teams and date, etc.?
So September 12th is the AGM, another morning shift at 10 a.m. We will be online, so very similar to this forum, and we'll probably use a Zoom platform is what our thought is for right now, and then we'll probably live stream it too, so have it kind of available for people there. We'll kind of go through the usual AGM things, apart from the split outs of the divisions where we usually talk about schedule and kind of finalize any of those things. We won't be doing any of that because we don't have that discussion, but we have elections of 2 positions, right, Kerry? It's president and treasurer. And so those 2 positions will coming up for election. And so that will be the primary things. We have some bylaws. We're going to do those outside the AGM, right? The bylaw change for the referees. And then there are just be some other general components, which we'll kind of go through as usual. We'll do our normal annual reports and kind of go from there. Kerry, did you have anything else on the AGM to talk about?
Yeah, I'd actually like to talk about that bylaw change. So there's a couple of things from last year's meeting that we're really trying to get finalized, that we've been kind of putting in the works, and we've had some things slow us up. So clubs were emailed about an addendum to our bylaws to add a referees representative to our board, and I won't go into significant detail. It's all on our website. We've offered people the opportunity if they have questions regarding that. So we'll be submitting, since we've already called that for a special vote, we'll be sending out a thing for people to be able to vote online. And what I'd like to say about that, since I have this opportunity, is that the referees are an integral part of our game. At the AGM last year, people were asking us in terms of things, in terms of referee development, and we'd really all work better if we were all working on the same page. Mary, who was our women's VP, who is actually working, so she can't make this, has been working to get together a women's development camp. And so if we talk about that on our board call, and then we say, how can we develop referees, and what can we do with the referees? So it'd just really be better if we had a referees representative providing that perspective on our board. And I'd say that this past year, the referees have done an amazing job picking up what they're doing in terms of development. And I think a collaborative effort, it would make it easier for us from a budget perspective to kind of work directly with them, because we wind up having a lot of offline conversations where if everyone was just in the same room. So we're going to be putting out that bylaw change to a vote, and we'll be doing that before the AGM. And then I have one other thing to say, that's not question related, but that just really regards, and if you've stayed with us this long, I really appreciate you being on for almost an hour of your Sunday morning. But we want people playing rugby. And so I just want people to know that we're not trying to create barriers for you. What we're trying to do is come up with ways that will provide you with insurance coverage, which will return to play safely, so that we just can't look bad. We can't risk that in the communities that were the coronavirus outbreak, but we also understand that people are adults. And so we want to get people out there. If you're like me, this has taken a huge toll on you having to be home and not out with your team. For a lot of us, our team is integral to our mental health. I think a lot of people I would encourage everyone to try to figure out a way that they can return to play safely. And even if right now you're not even able to do an in-person training, get with your players online, do a film review. We want the teams to continue to get together, and we just have to figure out different ways to do things in this time to kind of advance rugby while we're all kind of more stuck at home. But if you can get your players out, I am sure they'd rather hit each other with a noodle than not be able to do anything. So I just really hope that people can kind of just work within the parameters that are set, because we really want people playing rugby. And everybody's going to have a nice, we always tell people they need to rest, and the players never listen. All those nagging injuries are going to be gone. So hopefully, if they're not, then you've not made the most of your time. But we really want people. We want people back out there as soon as possible. We're just trying to interpret these guidelines for you to make it work.
No, well said, Carrie. The numbers hopefully will continue to drop in the state of Florida, and hopefully we'll be able to get back out there on the rugby pitch, hit each other, as you said. Rick, Miskey, and Ian, you've been very quiet there in the background. Do you have anything to add before we wrap this up?
We're just the pretty faces.
Exactly. So, as Evan said, 8 p.m. on September 12th. Stay tuned to all the social media channels and the FRU website to find out the link for all that and how to register. Obviously, we'd like to see every team, at least representative from every team out there. I know there's a lot of stuff to be discussed, especially I know on the collegiate side of things and where that's all being organized and who's doing what. So, yeah, I think 3 Saturdays from now, September 12th. I really appreciate everybody joining us for this. Again, Charlie will be posting the repost links for anybody that wants to watch this after the case. And I'm sure it'll be on the FRU pages as well. So Evan, Carrie, Rick, Ian, Jesse's there in the background, and Keel as well. Thank you for joining us this evening. Well, this morning.
Thank you guys for making this happen. Yeah. So, special thanks. I mean, Evan's kind of worked with you guys more. You guys have been fabulous in terms of making this happen and providing a forum that works well for everybody. So we're really appreciative of you guys working with us like you always do. But this is, we had to roll everybody out of bed, and we appreciate it.
No, glad to help. And obviously our next episode of Talking Florida Rugby this evening at 4 p.m. with the Tropical Sevens crew. Going to have some very interesting chats there about the status of that tournament and how it got to, the behemoth that it is today on the youth sevens team in North America. There's sevens team in North America. So Charlie and I will see you tonight at 4 p.m. Eastern. And thanks for joining us, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.